Fast fact. A 2022 Federal Trade Commission report found that over 60% of funeral homes provide little to no pricing information on their websites. But a traditional funeral typically costs between $7,000 and $10,000. I'm Drew Thomas, and this is Bank Chats. So we're going to talk about something a little bit different, I think, today than what we typically do.
Yeah, something we haven't even breached the topic of yet. Yeah.
We typically talk a lot about banking products and services and stuff. And when we think of when most people think of banking products, I think they typically think of things like checking accounts, savings accounts, and CDs and things like that, right?
Right.
But you don't always think about some of the stuff we're going to talk about today. Let me ask you this: like, this can be a bit of a touchy subject. So, have you ever dealt with like the end of life sort of thing, like funerals? Like, have you had anybody?
I have not yet. No. Yeah. So, both of my parents are still alive. So, luckily, I haven't had to deal with that. And anyone that's passed away in our family, they've dealt with. But my parents are getting older, so I'm eventually going to have to deal with that. I kind of grew up around a lot of death too. I had family members that are in the funeral business, and
that's right. You do, right? So you probably kind of.
So I grew up in a funeral home pretty much, but
so to you, it's really kind of not a thing.
Well, yeah, yeah, like, not this kind of stuff. Right?
It's like me growing up, with my dad, like fixing cars. Like to me, it's just a place you hang out. Right. It's not the to some people the mechanic is a scary place.
Right. Funeral parlor was my playground.
Yeah. No, totally.
Yeah.
So with us today, we have a special guest who is going to sort of walk us through some of this stuff. His name is Tim Walters, right? Hi, Tim. How you doing?
Hi, Tim.
Hi. Good. And so, Tim, tell us a little bit about what you do and your background, so that we can get an idea of why we're inviting you to talk about death.
Okay. Yeah, that's fine. I run the Perpetual Care Services division of our trust company, our trust department here at AmeriServ. And the Perpetual Care area has about 200 cemetery and funeral home trusts throughout about 4 states in the country. And it's a little bit of a niche business that we have developed in the trust company, and it's basically the death care industry. And we're talking to funeral homes and cemeteries and investing their money, taking their money in trust and then investing that money in several different ways. There's, cemeteries can do permanent lot care, trusts that they have to, by statute, put so much money away every year from the lot sales. And then on a funeral home side, if you go pre-need, which I think we're going to talk about, if you go pre-plan at a funeral home or a cemetery, those monies usually by statute have to be invested in a trust or an insurance product or something. So
okay.
I think that's what we wanted to talk about today.
Yeah. So when we talk about pre-need, I think that well, first of all, let's start with this. Nobody wants to talk about this stuff, right?
No.
I mean, it
is taboo for most people, and it is something, unfortunately, that you have to talk about. And I'll give you anecdotally, just to start the conversation. In 2008, I lost both of my parents 22 days apart. And I know that's a bad way to start a podcast, but I'm standing there trying to pick up the pieces, thinking, okay, what do I do here? Do we cremate them? Do we bury them? What kind of service did they want? Did they want flowers? Did they want this? Did they want that? So kind of a deer in the headlights situation.
Sure.
And in a situation like that, where most people are pulling their hair out in a very, very bad time. With one, I dealt with two. And, for the rest of my life, I wondered, did I do the right thing? Because we didn't talk about this stuff enough. I mean, everybody wants to think that they are invincible and they're going to live forever. But unfortunately, sometime it catches up with us. And in their case, it was 22 days apart. So it's a little pronounced given what most people deal with. But for me, at that time, I wasn't involved in our trust company, but it became evident when I started working with them that, any kind of financial plan at all should include some discussion between loved ones about what people's intentions are.
Sure.
So
yeah, funeral homes, they luckily, walk you through the process, but that's still a lot of decisions to make.
It is.
In a bad, vulnerable time. Yeah.
When you're heartbroken.
Right.
And that is not a good time to be making decisions for any of us.
Right.
So.
Yeah. When, we, my wife and I, we basically just went through a lot of this last year with her parents. Her parents died essentially 6 months apart. Thankfully, her dad had done a lot of this stuff ahead of time. He had, a burial reserve for himself, for her mom, and some of the stuff was, discussed with the funeral home ahead of time, and he had already chosen a headstone and all that kind of stuff. And I can only imagine, like you said, like when you're in that kind of a state and you're grieving the loss of your loved one and so forth, the last thing that you're trying to think about at that point is whether or not they want to have an angel or a cross or something on their headstone, right? That's not the first thing on your mind.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and pre-planning takes a lot of that away. It makes people, it gives people kind of an outline. The heartbroken, basically, that are losing their loved one, what to do. And in some cases, too, it relieves a lot of that. If somebody's prepaying up front, it relieves a lot of that financial stress, because we hear about that all the time, where folks will pass away unexpectedly and the family has to pick up the financial side, which can be expensive. So in the state of Pennsylvania, well, nationally right now, the average funeral is about $10,000. Now, if you do direct cremation, you can do it for a lot less than that. Obviously you can do a very scaled down funeral for less than 10, or you can do a lot more than $10,000. We see bills coming in all the time from our trust that range anywhere from $5,000 to $25,000. That's a lot of money for people to come out of pocket when you least expect it. So that will help. That helps as well when you can do like a pre-plan, but also prepay it, which a lot of people do. I think I have a statistic here, 65% of the people will do some type of prepayment along with pre-plan. You don't always have to just pre-plan your final affairs and pay them at the same time. You can plan them and pay them later. There's multitudes of ways you can do this. So
you can do payment plans essentially.
You can do payment plans.
It's a little bit easier.
Yeah. Some people will put it in a trust, which we manage. A lot of funeral directors use prepaid insurance, different products than what we do on the trust side, but essentially the same thing. You're setting money aside in a prepaid insurance policy basically to cover those costs. The second part of that is, you sit down with the funeral director or the cemeterian and you say to them, this is what I want. I want this casket. I want this urn. I want these flowers. I want this service. And it takes all that guesswork away from people. And, to your point, you can even do it, like I said, in a cemetery. You can pre-plan your vaults, your headstones, all that stuff.
So when someone does a sort of a pre-planning like that or pays ahead, and you say they don't always have to, but say you decide, okay, well I'm gonna meet with the funeral director. I'm gonna pre-plan all this stuff. I'm gonna pick out all the things that I want. I'm gonna pay for it. What happens if, for example, you live another 10 years? Like, does the cost fixed? Like once you've paid for it, is that now like there's no additional cost for the family later? Or is putting it into something like a trust a way to sort of ensure that even if things go up in terms of price, that it's still covered? Is that...
It all depends upon the contract. And if the contract is guaranteeing prices at today's values, then you are completely insulated from inflation. But with inflation being the way it's been the last 20 years or whatever, a lot of funeral directors will put some type of a inflation adjustment in their contract. So maybe it might not be exactly what you ordered today, 10 years from now, but it will depend upon the contract. Some of them still guarantee. It would just depend upon how they're writing their contracts. And both are legal. You can do both. You don't have to necessarily. It's all in what's written at that point.
So is it something where the person that is planning either for themselves or their loved one puts that money aside, and then does the account in their name, or do they give it to the funeral director and then the funeral director puts that money aside? Does the funeral director like contract with somebody like a trust company to like manage that, or how does that work?
We are the person or the people that manage the trust. So a funeral home has a trust. Okay, it's a pre-need trust. When an individual comes into the funeral home and they do a pre-plan, and they have a contract, and let's just say that's $10,000, and it has various amounts or various things that they're purchasing in that contract, they will then send that money to us, and it's put in an irrevocable trust. And within that trust, AmeriServ then turns around and in accordance with the funeral director's investment objectives and invests the money in accordance with how the funeral director wants the money to be invested. And typically, they want some equity exposure and some fixed income exposure. The equity exposure is to keep up with inflation because the markets tend to, if you remember that statistic that's always thrown about, anywhere from 8 to 12% over time is what the equity markets will return over time. So you have a better shot if there's equities in a portfolio to keeping up with that inflation as well. But we then are the people that manage that money, manage it, and we also keep track of the participants' prorated share of that. So there's activity over time. There's income, many different pluses and minuses that go into a person's prorated share. And hopefully it's growing over time. I mean, there have been times when the markets are not cooperating where a person will pass away fairly quickly after, and it's worth less than what it was when the money went in. That's a whole other subject. But you're hoping by the money going into the trust that it's going to grow over time in there. But the participants, that money then becomes the participants' share in the trust. And the trust is actually the funeral homes for benefit of that participant, basically. When they cut the check to the funeral home or the insurance company or whatever, it's the trust actually owns the funds at that point. People get that a little confusing sometimes. They look at it and say, well, wait a minute, I put that money in, it's my money. Once it goes into the trust, it's a trust-owned asset for benefit for those individual people. I hope I'm not being too confusing.
No. So the trust, if the money that was invested earns significantly more than what was needed to pay off that funeral, then the funeral director or the funeral home reaps the benefit of that.
Depends upon how the contract is written. So a lot of funeral directors do give the family the money back.
Okay.
Depending upon how the contract is written. And then certain state laws also dictate what the surplus what can happen to the surplus. So it's a hard question to answer. You have to look at state law and you have to look at the contracts itself. But by and large, you're hoping that what you've put aside is going to outpace inflation.
Sure.
And if you're going to be around for some period of time, God willing for all of us, that statistic I used, that 8%, so hopefully you're going to get to a point where the funds that have been put away are exceeding what the current cost of those goods and services are.
So it's not really a requirement per se that a funeral director use a trust like that. They could, but they could also just put that money into an account of some sort and then just sort of say, hey, this is how much you gave me. If it costs more whenever the time comes, then you might have to make up the difference, or I might just be okay with, hey, I might have to make up the difference, that sort of thing.
Pennsylvania state law does require it to be put into a trust.
Oh, okay.
So, or an insurance policy. Insurance is something that's acceptable as well. They won't allow you to just take that money and stick it in the funeral home's general fund. It has to be segregated in some kind of a trust product that's segregated from the general monies of the business.
Okay.
So, but we do generally see if a person has pre-planned and then prepaid, that if the money's in there for a while, and it's hard to say what that rule of thumb is, but sometimes that would depend upon the economy and the markets and how that's all working too. But generally speaking, you don't if it's in there for a decent period of time, it's going to exceed what was originally put in there. That's why you're doing this, basically.
So you had said that this goes into an irrevocable trust. What if you ended up moving?
Good point.
Does that money follow you?
Most states allow for at least the original deposit to go with you.
Okay.
No questions asked. And that is what I've seen in the states we're involved in. And think about it. We're in a very, very ambulatory society. People move around.
Sure. Yeah. Oh, yeah. 100%.
Retire down south much more than they do here. And if they put money in a pre-need fund up here, then decided they were going to move to South Carolina or Florida, they want to be able to make sure that they have that access to that money. So most state laws do allow for that money to follow you wherever you go. That's a very good point.
So there's definitely a difference between me opening up an account and putting something in, because you can have an individual account that is like a untouchable account that is specifically for funerals, correct?
You can do a burial on the bank side. You can do a burial reserve account. It's like a CD. It's an irrevocable burial CD that you set aside, and then that money is accessible whenever you pass, basically to pay those expenses. And some funeral directors do use that as their only, or one of the ways of funding pre-need, or having people fund pre-need, that is.
Okay.
Now there's two different ways, and we talked about this. Pre-need, at need is when we talked about, unfortunately, people walk in after a tragedy or after somebody passes and say, we need to put all this together. And somebody's writing a check for it. That's called at need.
Okay.
What we're doing is the opposite. What we're telling people to do is don't do it at need. Try to get people's intentions up front, determine what they want, and because everybody's different. Like, I'm running this area, and I'll be honest with you, and probably all my funeral directors would kill me for saying this, but I don't want anything. I want somebody to spread my ashes off of the Atlantic Ocean somewhere.
Yeah.
Of course, it would cost some money to get there.
Yeah.
But
and to get permission to do it, I guess, and whatever.
No offense if any of my funeral directors are listening to that, but we all have different thoughts of how we want our final affairs to be taken. But how do we know if you don't talk about it? Right. That's the most important part of this whole conversation, is people talking about it, making sure that that their family members know. And it's not, you're never too old or too young to do it. So
yeah, I mean, I sadly I agree with that. I mean, I woke up this morning and I have plans for the day. I mean, I fully expect to finish this conversation. I fully expect to go home and make dinner and, watch TV and go to bed and wake up tomorrow morning and wash, rinse, repeat, But that doesn't necessarily mean that that's what's in the cards for me, despite my age. I mean, I'm not really all that old. And there are a lot of people, I think, that they just feel like if they kick the can down the road long enough, they won't have to ever deal with it. But then you got to think about your family and the people that you're leaving behind, because they do have to deal with it, right?
That's the most traumatic thing. I think if you talk to funeral directors, and just my own personal experience, that was a very traumatic time. And then to have the extra stress involved with having to figure out whether or not I think I'm doing the right thing, because like I said, we didn't talk about it. We never talked about this at all. And, my folks were extremely vibrant till the time that they passed, 22 days apart.
Yeah.
And that's probably why maybe we didn't talk about it, but maybe that's an important lesson too. Just because you're vibrant and healthy doesn't mean you shouldn't talk about this, because you never know.
Yeah.
Just never know. So.
Yeah, and I would say that too, as difficult as the conversation is, having these conversations while everybody is calm and somewhat rational is probably a benefit too, because you to your point about you didn't know necessarily what your parents wanted. Like, there are people that feel like, well, if I don't know what my mom would want, I'm just gonna throw everything at it. I'm gonna spend $30,000 and I'm gonna do this big thing. And in reality, if I would have talked to her, she might have just said she wanted something simple, But you feel obligated in the moment because you're feeling grief at the loss of your parent, and you want what's
always
best
want the
for
best,
them.
right?
And,
Yeah.
So having a rational, calm conversation ahead of time might be the way to go, as opposed to just making those decisions emotionally.
Absolutely.
And
then there's a whole other discussion these days. The death care industry, we didn't even mention it up earlier. Burial versus cremation, basically. Cremation has basically almost taken over the death care industry.
Really?
Yes. I think the statistics I have here is last year in 2025, cremation nationwide exceeded 63%.
Wow.
Of all end of life affairs. So in the state of Pennsylvania, we are above 56% now in 2020.
I wonder why that is. I mean,
cheaper.
It's cheaper.
I guess it is.
Some statistics here that show that you could do direct cremation as little as $795 and up to like $3,500, versus like $10,000. Now, if you cremate but do all the other services, that might get you to that $10,000 number, depending about what you're taking or what your costs are there.
Yeah. You're not buying a plot. You're not buying a casket. I live down the street from a crematory. That thing always on. Yeah. So I can believe it.
Yeah. Projecting that by 2033, the nationwide level of cremation will be 70%.
Wow.
And for the longest time, cremation crept up little by little, but once societal norms changed and thought process, there was a lot of ethnic and religious thoughts about cremation versus traditional burial. Some of those have been dispelled. People feel differently about it now, and unfortunately, you hate to say it, but the economics of it sometimes are forcing people's hands here as well. Especially if the queasiness around the whole subject or not the ethnic or religious societal norms have changed a little bit on it. People might elect for something more economical, but it has really changed the business. It's changed the business for funeral directors and for cemeteries. They're finding the ones that are cutting edge are doing very different kind of niche projects. A lot of cemeteries in the area are putting in like columbarium and niches and things that you can put an urn in rather than traditional burial, just to basically stay relevant and to continue to participate with their clients on this with the situation of cremation increasing so much.
Yeah.
It's like anything, the only constant in life is change. And for that business has changed quite a bit. But they're doing a good job of finding ways to still serve the customer. So.
I was actually going to say that because one of the things that I was sort of taken aback, I wouldn't say taken aback, but it's something you just don't think about. Like there are things about this that because it's not easily discussed or often discussed, I guess maybe is a better term, that you don't always think about. And I kind of liken it in a weird way to the first time you move out of your parents' house and you don't realize all the things that you need, that you just sort of took for granted while they were there. Like when you move out and you have to go to the store and you have to buy a plunger, right? Like nobody thinks about needing that. Like you think you need, I need a couch and I need a TV, but all of a sudden you need a plunger, or something. But I was sort of surprised by the idea that like you literally have to buy a plot of land. Like if you're going to be buried, that plot of land belongs to you. Like it's the last 33 square feet of land you're going to own,
You'll get a deed in most cases. And, that deed will then belong to you for, in perpetuity. Mm-hmm. It's not like Europe where they sell it for 40 years or something. And then, that's a whole other subject.
Oh, yeah. Oh, really? Do they do that?
It's because of the lack of property over there.
Oh, okay.
Sometimes they bury them 3 deep and, one on top of the other because they're running out of land to do this. And
maybe, that probably doesn't necessarily apply too much to the United States right now, but that might be why you're seeing cremation rise in some of the other areas because they don't.
Could be.
Like, where are you going to put everybody? Yeah. Our population is larger than it's ever been, and that means that that is going to roll over until population starts to decline. But there's always going to have to be room for somebody.
It was interesting. I was reading a study today in preparation of this, and there was a study that I saw by one of the insurance companies, and they had gone out and looked at all of the states. And there was a kind of a state by state, region by region results. And the one thing that I took home from that was that out in the West, clear out West, cremation's over 80% in some of those states.
Wow.
West. I can't remember exactly which ones they are, but they're the ones on the Pacific, basically.
Yeah.
And but I'm wondering if that isn't what you're, a direct result of things are a lot more dense in some of those areas. Property's a lot more expensive. So
there's locations where it's just the environment that is not conducive to burials too. You have places with high groundwater. There you see more mausoleums than anything.
Yeah. You're right. I mean, you go down to Louisiana or Baton Rouge or something like that. It's going to be different than it is around here. And even in Pennsylvania, there are certain rules like there has to be a vault, and you can't just put the casket directly in the ground. Like that has to be in like a.
That's changing a little bit too because there are some natural burials that are taking place now. Certain places are doing natural burials where they're doing certain things. With natural, I don't know the whole process, but
without embalming and
with all that,
right.
So
giving back to nature type thing,
exactly.
Yeah, right,
yeah.
I know one of the local cemeteries is doing that. They have an area that is dedicated to natural burials now. So I think people are starting to, look at some other ways of doing this as well. But you had mentioned buying a plot of land. That's the other thing that we manage. And I mean, this wouldn't really have anything to do with our clients, but cemeteries by statute need to, if they sell a plot of land for somebody's burial or a mausoleum crypt or something, they have to put a certain percentage of that away. Depending upon what state it is, the percentage would be different. But and they put that money away in perpetuity, meaning forever, in the trust, and the trust lasts forever because, and think about it, if you're going to be buried somewhere, I mean, I don't know as if I care 200 years from now, but somebody's probably thinking that they want the cemetery to be well taken care of as time goes on.
Sure.
So those funds stay in there. The principal stays in there forever, and the only thing they can draw out for the maintenance of the cemetery is the income over time. They can take principal out if they get a court order, say a tornado comes through or something, and the courts say they can do that, but typically that's what it takes. But we manage those trusts as well, and I think that would be something to consider is if you're still planning on traditional burial, you want to make sure that whatever cemetery that you're thinking about is being well maintained, and not only well maintained, but that they're putting the monies aside and their licenses are up to date because they are licensed by the Real Estate Commission. Most for-profit cemeteries are, so you can get that information in the state website very easily. Same with a funeral director. You can look and see if their funeral license is up to date. So
that was one of the other questions I was going to ask, because after Jeff said about what happens if you move, I was going to say, what happens if the funeral home goes out of business, or the funeral director retires or something like that, and just doesn't do that anymore? Like, and yet you're still here and you made arrangements with them. What happens then?
Well, we have some situations like that where funeral homes have gone out of business. Maybe the proprietor wanted their kids to take it over. The kids say, I'm not doing that. I'm going to be a doctor or whatever. So
sure,
they work the funeral home until they can't.
I want to work on the life side. I want to work on the life side.
I didn't do that intentionally, but
no, it worked though.
I do think that those situation exists. I know personally that exists, and that's one of the nice things about the money being in trust is we hold on to that money until such time as that person is or the estate needs that money. So unfortunately, we do have some trusts where the funeral home no longer exists, but the participants are still in our trust. And once they pass, that money can be used for at another funeral home. There are times when that money is assigned to another funeral home, depending upon the size of the trust and a number of factors. But that's the good thing about having the money in trust. And it's not like they can go out of business and take the remainder of the trust money and go somewhere and, live in the warm. That money stays in the trust until such time that that person needs it out of the way, basically.
Yeah, it's as if you had moved. Right.
Yeah. So,
and one of the other terms that you mentioned earlier, that I wanted to touch on just to make sure that people understand the difference. You mentioned revocable and irrevocable. So at what point can you create, what kind of an account can you say, well, I'm going to put this away for my funeral, but then I changed my mind, I'm going to take it back, versus ones that, what's the advantage of having that versus one that once you put the money in there, it's in there forever?
Most of I don't know in what context I used revocable versus non-revocable, but most of the state laws require it to be non-revocable because they want that money there, and they want people to have the peace of mind of knowing the money's there and it's going to be there, until they need it. If they're putting it in at 60 and they live to 110, God willing that the money is there. Basically, there are certain irrevocable trusts, but the revocable trusts, but the irrevocable are going to be much more common.
Does that also protect the money from something like, for example, if you had to go into a nursing home or something like that? Whenever they look at your assets as you enter that.
Pre-planning is something that there is a tool that they use for Medicare. It's a Medicare putting certain of your assets aside to pre-plan for your final expenses. It's a way of managing assets for Medicaid.
Okay.
So people do that as a planning aspect of their whole financial plan. So,
because I would think that would almost be also part of the conversation that people should be having is, as you age, okay, well, what are you willing to? And sometimes I guess you don't have a choice if you have some sort of a mental issue, if you develop some sort of dementia or something, or maybe your spouse passes before you do, and you don't have family nearby. But those are kinds of the questions
Medicaid
too.
Requires them to be irrevocable, though. So when you put that money aside, you can't go back in later and decide that you want it back.
Okay.
They're going to require it to be irrevocable, and then typically we have to send them as trustee a letter stating that it's irrevocable, and then they will then turn that on to Medicaid for whatever purposes they need to get their Medicaid.
It probably helps too, if your spouse maybe does not have the same wishes as you did. It kind of ensures that you get to go out how you wanted to go out.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then there's the whole aspect of all of this. And I love to hear some of the attorneys talk. We go to seminars that, life is changing too. The whole cremation thing versus burial. First marriages, second marriages, third marriages. Like, maybe you want
That's true.
a traditional burial, but, the second wife really wants to have you cremated, but you have pre-planning, for this and, who gets on the headstone. There's all these things that, have not kept up with, or the law has not kept up with in life. Multiple marriages, multiple families, the Brady Bunch, the one side of the family may want what there's a lot of cutting edge law associated with this. And the other big thing is you don't have to bury remains that are cremated. And that's a big issue right now. I mean, attorneys deal with it every day, that folks will be cleaning out mom and dad's coat cupboard, and they'll find, 3 urns up there that was grandma, grandpa, and great-grandma up there. Hey, what do you do with all of those,
Yeah.
How do you deal with that? What is the legal way of doing? I mean, that's a whole other subject, but there's a lot of things to consider with all of this. Certainly, letting people know what your intent is a large part of this whole thing.
And so as part of letting them know what your intent is, based on that, I'm sure the answer to this question is going to be different. But what are some things that most people should definitely cover when it comes to pre-need? Beyond I guess the
funeral director,
flower arrangement versus, something a little more serious.
And that could cause problems for families too. I mean, I've heard stories of people fighting over whether we're going to do carnations or roses, kind of thing. So
you would think that there would be so many other problems to try to work out there. But yeah, you're right. I mean, it's
it's emotion. I had a very good friend years ago, and this is really off topic, that he worked for Bank of America's, either Bank of America or Wells Fargo's private bank, and he said the 2 things that people fight over in estates are the Lionel train set and the lake house, because they're both emotional. So
it makes sense. Yeah,
roses, but dad loved carnations. That could create an issue. So
sure,
take it off the table, put it down. What you're going to be doing, kind of thing. That is a minor thing. Obviously, you want to let your family know. Do I want to be cremated? Do I want to have a traditional burial? Mm-hmm. Okay, if I'm gonna. And funeral directors do a wonderful job of helping you out with this. They'll take you through. You can pick a casket. You can pick this. You can pick that. You can pick what kind of service you want. You can even pick what kind of wake you want afterwards. There's a number of things. Whether you want a hearse, whether you don't, whether you want a graveside service or not, all that stuff can be pre-planned up front. Mm-hmm. And that takes all of the not wish work, but the legwork, the mystery out of it for the family, and by doing that up front.
Yeah, I'm sure that conversation for pre-need is a lot different than what did you say, the whenever you need service right now? What did you
at need.
Yeah. Walk in and I've been in quite a bit to visit our clients for one reason or another, and you see the people walking through the door, deer in the headlights, passed unexpectedly last night. What did she want? Kind of thing. So you take that away, take that away from your family. It's a stress that if you love your family, you're not going to want them to go through, kind of thing.
Sure.
Take that away. And maybe this is just general advice. It's not financial advice, but there is a piece of financial advice here. If you could get a contract that's guaranteed in an economy that has true inflation, then why would you not want to lock in prices now to insulate your family from having to write a check after you've already written a check?
Sure. Yeah. No, I totally get it.
Yeah.
You know.
So let's. I want to also still mention a little bit about some of the things we sort of started down a path and we kind of came back about perpetual care and the cemetery. So obviously, I think that most families they sort of have this. Especially, I think if you're a grandson or granddaughter or something, and you're going to see great grandpa at the cemetery, and you're learning about your family history, but you didn't really know them or anything. You're not actively involved in maintaining that area if they were buried, for example. But you said that cemeteries are obligated as part of their charter, I guess, if you want to call it, to maintain the grounds and stuff, right?
It's their through their trust agreement. Basically, they have to do they have to set aside a certain amount of money, and the trust continues to grow. And that money then is invested in the interest earnings and dividends and monies that come off of that are what is then sent back to the cemetery to cut the grass, to trim around the headstones. Now there are cemeteries that have flower funds too, fewer and far between these days, but some cemeteries will offer you a flower fund where you can go in and donate money up front. So there's money, flowers put on your grave every Memorial Day or certain times during the year. They have kind of gotten away from that, but there are some cemeteries that still do have that type of thing. If you're worried that there's flowers on your grave every year.
Now, what kind of things are not covered by that?
Well, I mean, basically, the perpetual care, permanent lot care, is for the care of the cemetery, not the
plot itself.
Plot itself, yeah. Because typically they will come around with the lawnmowers and the weed whackers and stuff and take care of it and keep things maintained. But you're not. Now, if you have a family mausoleum or something like that, that's a different story. There's a lot more work involved in maintaining that. Mm-hmm. So typically, those are set up under their own individual trust. So when you go through the cemeteries and you see these big mausoleums, usually there is a separate trust associated with that particular mausoleum, family mausoleum.
So there's obviously, I would say there's a difference between certain cemeteries too, yes. Because depending on your faith, you may have your synagogue, your mosque, your church that may manage the cemetery. There's also public cemeteries. Are there rules around the fact that the cemetery has to pass into ownership with somebody so that those trusts will continue to be utilized and the grounds maintained?
It's a permanent lot care trust. So if a cemetery is sold, if it's a for-profit cemetery, those funds then will transfer over to the new owner. Mm-hmm. Typically, if it's a not-for-profit, that not-for-profit stays not-for-profit, but for some reason one not-for-profit would take over another. Those monies then will go with the cemetery.
Okay.
They don't go away by virtue of some merger that occurs, because that happens. We have some fairly acquisitive funeral directors and cemeterians that buy and sell funeral homes and cemeteries all the time, for profit. There's quite a few of them out there. But the rules relative to both there's slight nuances depending upon whether or not it's for profit or not for profit. And then specifically, certain cemeteries that are religious based have more exemptions than the ones that are for profit.
Yeah, I was actually thinking of that because in our town, as you know, like we've had a number of churches over the years that have either merged, that used to have enough of a congregation that they were on their own independent church, and then they would merge into others, or they would sort of fall out of existence. I don't want to say it that way, but I mean, but yet they have their own little private cemeteries and stuff like that. So I didn't know what happens to those,
or what happens to a cemetery that runs out of room, that you're not adding plots, you're not adding you're not adding new monies into it.
You're hoping that the endowment fund, the permanent lot care, is large enough to take care of that over time. But you got to be thinking mathematics of inflation.
Right.
There's going to be a time where that stress is going to occur. We do have cemeteries, and there are cemeteries in Pennsylvania that are stressed just by virtue of that situation. Either they were a part of something, and now whatever that is defunct. So who's taking care of it falls into disrepair, or situations where they have sold just about every lot, and there's no more space left. So you would hope in that situation that the endowments are large enough that they can take care of it in perpetuity, but there isn't always that guarantee. And it is kind of an up. That's why I said, just, you want to be mindful when you're burying somebody. You take a good look around and make sure the place is being maintained, because in all through the country, it is a new thing, not a new thing, but I would say an emerging problem that there's cemeteries that are in disrepair that become even more disrepair because they don't have the monies, or for whatever reason the governing bodies have fallen defunct, and there's nobody really taking care of it anymore. Now the bigger ones, you don't have that problem with. The bigger for profits and folks that are doing it on a larger scale. I mean,
yeah, you don't have to worry about Arlington, most likely, or in our area we have how big is Grandview? Grandview's like the fourth or fifth largest cemetery in the country, I think. I
don't think it's that large, but it's fairly large.
It's big.
It's a big cemetery, and a very well-run cemetery.
Yeah.
And that is some. I don't know the statistics of Grandview.
Well, I didn't mean to put you on the spot for that, but I just mean it's a big area. Oh, yeah. And I mean, and it's,
say this: if anybody is listening from Grandview, it's one of the most attractive cemeteries that I've ever seen. It's so well taken care of.
And it's, I mean, one of the other things that I think is funny is my grandparents. My grandparents are in Grandview, but I know some people that are in other cemeteries, and one of them is Richland Cemetery too. And in both cases, it's, I don't know if it's ironic, but it's interesting that the scenic views and everything from those areas are some of the most beautiful views in all of the area, and yet it's a cemetery. It wasn't somebody that decided to put their house up there to be able to see out over the valley and all the ridge tops.
Yeah, some of the ridge up above Grandview there, that's some of the most beautiful it's scenic overlook that you're ever going to find up there.
Yeah. So I guess it's a testament to some degree that we give our loved ones
the best view in the house. Yeah. Final resting view. Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess the one of the other questions that I guess I have is the money that we talked about, like with the pre-need. Is there a percentage of that goes toward these perpetual care things? Like, does the funeral director say, okay, like I have to take so much of this and give it to the cemetery? Or how does the cemetery get that money then?
They're two different things, aren't they?
Well, that's what I'm saying. Yeah. It's
because, I mean, when you're if you walk into a funeral home and you put together a contract that you want this, and this, the funeral director is going to hold on to that contract. They're going to turn the money over to the trust. They're using an insurance that's going to go to the insurance company. Those are two totally different things. When we talk about the perpetual care side, that's just predominantly money that they're setting aside for the permanent care of the cemetery. All of those monies that you're talking about for all the other purposes, casket, flowers, urns, all that stuff, that's all kept at the funeral home, and then used for your whatever your final period is, and then but you can pre-plan in a cemetery too. You can go to them and buy pre-buy a headstone or whatever. So I mean, you can do pre-merchandise sales on both, but the perpetual care has really nothing to do with the pre-need. We manage both because our customers are both, and both of them involve trust, which is what we do. So,
Are there different levels of perpetual care, like different, I'm going to say packages type thing?
You mean
like,
pre-need?
No, the perpetual care. Like, can you?
No, the cemetery just has to put so much aside every year into the principal of the fund, basically, and then that is invested, and those monies then are used for the care of the cemetery.
Okay.
So that is the cemetery doing that, not the individual.
Right. You had mentioned like the flower fund.
Well,
for
flower
example.
is something different.
Okay, I didn't know if there was there was a package that just took care of the lawn, and there was a package that took care of doing this and that and that. Okay,
but I guess what we're hearing is that what you pay to the funeral home is different than what you pay to the cemetery. But you do pay the cemetery, so you're paying the cemetery for the land. You're paying the cemetery for the headstone potentially.
You're buying,
and parts of those fees go toward this perpetual care trust.
Yes,
gotcha.
I mean, let me use an example. You go up to Grandview right now, and you say, "I want to buy," as you mentioned, Grandview. I want to buy a plot of land up on the hill up there. They're going to go to their pricing list and their map, and they're going to say, "Okay, that's $1,000, whatever it is." I don't know. I'm not pricing it for them. But,
oh no, we're holding you to price. No,
exactly.
I'm kidding.
They will then close with you, sign whatever paperwork, and then they'll turn around and take 15% of that and send it to whatever bank they have a trust at, basically.
Gotcha.
And that money sits in there as principal. So $150 is going to sit in there forever, and then it'll draw interest and dividends depending upon how it's invested. That's the money that Grandview uses to basically cut its grass, to paint its buildings, to weed whack around stones and things. So
when it comes to the parts that we as individuals can handle or manage, should we go to our bank or our credit union and say, "Hey, I need help planning this out," and open a CD, like you said, or like a burial reserve? Or is it better to go to your funeral home or your funeral director and sort of do the pre-need planning with them?
Going to the bank and setting up a irrevocable burial reserve, it's only getting rid of one of the question marks, the money piece.
Mm-hmm.
But it maybe not be getting rid of the money piece completely, because if you don't know, given what your expectations are of what you want your final days to be, is it going to be enough? Is it, or is there going to be a balance that has to be paid? It's the same way some people say, "Well, I don't need any of that. I have a life insurance policy." You have a life insurance policy, but it's not answering the second part of the question, which are what are your intentions? What do you want?
Right.
Basically. Yes, the money may be there, but what are your intentions? And, any local funeral director would do a wonderful job in helping you walk through that. And they do. They have a list that they use, a contract pricing sheet that they use. And they go down the list basically very logically, and it would make sense to you. Okay, we're gonna offer you this casket or this urn, and then this service, this,
mm-hmm.
and then they have it on record, and they keep it on record. You keep it on record, so everybody knows what your intent is. I mean, the funding piece of it only takes care of, in my mind, part of it.
Yeah,
the real anguish piece for most people is undoubtedly, okay, what did they really want? Because we never talked about this. So, and I think that's a really important thing. I mean, we all spend our entire lives building 401ks and IRAs and trying to.
That's true. That's true.
But yet we don't talk about this. This is something that you really need to talk about with people and think about yourself. And I mean, I know people my personal friends that'll turn purple before they'll talk about this.
Sure.
And it's just part of life. So.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And yes, we are obviously a financially based podcast, and we're, and I think we got a lot of good information in this conversation about how to potentially handle the financial side. But I do agree with you that the financial side is only one part, and arguably the lesser important part. than just knowing what your family member or conveying what you want to your family members when it comes to this, and just, trying to put aside your discomfort and really just sit down and have these conversations. I think that's an important message. I
don't even know if we're using it anymore, but the whole financial partner for life thing.
Yeah.
There's other things that we talk to customers about, in the retirement services area. They talk to them about their IRAs, talk to them about their, their pension investments and so on and so forth. When somebody goes in to buy a house, the mortgage lenders put them into, it's not all about finance. It's about trying to accomplish what you want to get out of life. And that's a part of life. That's the one thing I wanted to convey today. And I think you wanted me to convey was that it's a very important part of life that we're not really, that most people get squeamish about and shouldn't.
Yeah, I think I think you said it very well. And I think that's true of, any good financial institution. Their products and services and their people are really just tools or vehicles to getting you what you want out of your situation. Your checking account is a tool so that you can pay your bills. Your savings account is a tool so that you can maybe put some money away for a rainy day. Your retirement is for your, there are tools and products involved here, but really it's not about selling you a tool or a product. It's about making sure that you have what you want out of life or beyond, and being able to help you make that happen.
Yeah.
So, we really appreciate you coming down and talking to us about this. Thank you for having the conversation, because it's
you'd be calling me the Grim Reaper around here.
No, I learned a lot. I don't know.
Oh yeah.
This is hopefully something that, by learning more about it, it makes me want to, potentially have those conversations too, because I think sometimes, and I think this is true of a lot of banking products, people don't ask the question because they feel like they're misinformed or underinformed, and they don't
know what to ask. Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
They don't know what to ask. So if you don't know what to ask, you're just going to keep your mouth shut so you don't seem dumb. And that's not the...
And you know what? To a certain extent, they shouldn't feel bad about that, because before I came to the trust company to run Perpetual Care Services, I ran a small little community bank, and I never dreamed that I would be in this business. But that one thing that happened to me in 2008 made me feel like this was something that I had to talk to people about at some point. And I do.
Yeah.
I talked to a lot of people about the importance of, because I was met square head on with, okay, what do you do? And, was I doing the right thing? And sometimes I still second guess it. So take it away completely by doing that. So, and I learn something every day, and my last disclosure is I am not an expert, and if I'd said something wrong today,
we put that stuff on the air. We do our best, but really, we say it in the disclosure for all of you that don't stick around to listen to it. But we always tell people, like, we're one source of information.
Sure.
We want you to reach out to people that you trust, that you feel are confident in getting their advice. But we hope that we can at least help you to start that conversation, because knowing more about this stuff is hopefully a way to broach that subject and maybe get you to go talk to somebody that you trust about it. Because you listen to us, so.
And I'll have to say there's a lot of really good people locally that people don't have to go far and wide. There's a lot of funeral homes and cemeteries here locally that they can talk to about this stuff. And, there's a lot of your financial advisors sell pre-need insurance too. So it's not necessarily just talking to, you want to talk to them about your intentions, but if you're just interested in a financial piece, certainly there's between the bank products and pre-need insurance that just about any financial advisor sells, you can handle that as well. So
awesome.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions, Jeff? You got anything?
I don't think so.
All right.
Thank you.
Tim, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Appreciate it.
All right.
This podcast focuses on having valuable conversations on various topics related to banking and financial health. The podcast is grounded in having open conversations with professionals and experts with the goal of helping to take some of the mystery out of financial and related topics, as learning about financial products and services can help you make more informed financial decisions. Please keep in mind that the information contained within this podcast and any resources available for download from our website or other resources relating to Bank Chats is not intended and should not be understood or interpreted to be financial advice. The hosts, guests, and production staff of Bank Chats expressly recommend that you seek advice from a trusted financial professional before making financial decisions. The hosts of Bank Chats are not attorneys, accountants, or financial advisors, and the program is simply intended as one source of information. The podcast is not a substitute for a financial professional who is aware of the facts and circumstances of your individual situation.
In 1984, the Federal Trade Commission introduced what is known as the Funeral Rule, which states that consumers have the right to get a general price list from a funeral provider when they ask about funeral arrangements. They also have the right to choose the funeral goods and services they want, with some exceptions. And it must be made clear if state or local laws require the purchase of any particular item. More detailed information on this rule can be found by clicking the link in the description. The larger issue, as we discussed today, is that these decisions are often made quickly and under great emotional stress. What kind of funeral should it be? What funeral provider should be used? Should the body be buried, cremated, donated to science? Does the person want an expensive funeral, or would they rather distribute the bulk of their remaining assets to their family? All questions that could be answered and put in writing well ahead of time, if only we could get past the uncomfortable nature of discussing these things with our loved ones. AmeriServ Presents Bank Chats is produced and distributed by AmeriServ Financial Incorporated. Music by Schneckmind. My everlasting gratitude goes out to my co-host and executive producer, Jeff McTavish. Please like and subscribe to our show so that you never miss an episode. For now, I'm Drew Thomas. So long.